Hey guys, this is Mitch with Point CGI, and today we're going to go through the process of building your project in C# with Godot. So we're going to go through the process of downloading and installing Godot, setting up Godot to work with C#, setting up Visual Studio Code to work with C#, and if we have time, we'll set up Visual Studio itself to work with Godot. So that's what I got in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come over to the Godot website and click on the download icon. Let's go click on that. We're going to download the mono version, and you want to make sure you pull down this version. This version has C# support. If you pick the standard version, it's not going to work. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on this 64-bit icon. I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to download it again, but you're going to download that and go ahead and extract that. Also, while you're here, come down here to the Visual Studio Build Tools or the Mono SDK. You can either download or install either one of them. If you go to the Visual Studio Tools, it'll actually let you download Visual Studio from here. And that would be a good time to go ahead and pull down Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. So I suggest you pull down both of these, click on it, and then go ahead and download Visual Studio and click on Visual Studio Code and download Visual Studio Code. You don't have to have both. You have to have one of them, but you don't have to have both. I prefer Visual Studio over Visual Studio Code for C# development, but that's probably just because I'm old and I've used Visual Studio for C# development for years now. So it's just, I'm comfortable with it. Now, if you choose not to download Visual Studio, you'll need to come over here and download the Mono debugging kit. So you'll just go ahead and click on download Mono 64-bit or 32-bit, depending on which one is your operating system of choice. So we'll go ahead and download the Mono 64-bit, and you'll see I'm going to start pulling that down. Okay, so the first thing that you can do is you're going to have to install Mono. Now, I don't need to do this. I've already done this, so I'm not going to run through all that, but you just accept, you install it, and then you're good to go. If you chose Visual Studio, yeah, I'll cancel that. If you chose Visual Studio, you just double click on Visual Studio Community. It's going to yell at you, and then you go ahead and start installing it. Now, I already have it all downloaded and installed, so I'm not going to run through that, but I'm going to make sure that what'll happen is it'll pop up here and it'll actually tell you the things that you want to install on your workload. And I set mine up to pull down all of game development. I did mobile development. You don't have to do this one. I chose to do it. .NET for desktop development, I suggest you pull that one down. And if you're going to do any web development, so for instance, if your game is going to have like a web server or like a messaging system or a scoreboard or something like that that needs to be housed outside of your project, I suggest pulling down the ASP.NET and web development. Now, once you guys have those downloaded and modified, you just click modify and it'll start downloading and it'll start installing Visual Studio. Again, you don't have to do that, but this is one of the options. Now it's going to kind of think for a bit. All right, now that that's installed, and again, you don't have to use the Visual Studio installer. I just chose to because it makes life way easier for me. Now, what we can do is we can go ahead and make sure we have Visual Studio Code installed, which I do. We need to make sure that we build out our Godot project. So let's go ahead and open up our Godot stable, and we will open this up. Now you can see I have a couple of things here, but let's go here and type Godot C# example, and I'm going to create that folder and create and edit. Now I'm going to resize this for you so you guys can actually see what I'm doing here, because I always record on a much larger screen. All right. Now, there are some things that you just need to modify for you to be able to debug and do things like that in the C# development. So what we're first going to do is we're going to create a 2D scene. I'm just doing that because we need a scene to debug. So hit Control S. We'll just call it Node 2D because, again, this is just a demo project. So, it's just something for you to learn. Now, go to the editor menu, editor settings here, and then we're going to come down to mono. All the way down at the bottom, there's a mono section, and I've probably already done this, but if you click editor, and you can change your editor to like Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, or something like that. Now, in my case, I prefer Visual Studio, but I'll show you Visual Studio Code first. That way, those of you who don't like Visual Studio can don't need to watch the rest of the video. So click on Visual Studio Code, and then scroll up, go to the text editor, and let's change in the files section the open dormant script on scene change. Go ahead and get rid of that. And what that does is if you have a script here, when you click on it, it doesn't automatically load the script here. So that way you don't, you're not just loading scripts randomly in Godot. It saves some trouble. Now, after that, we're going to go ahead and go to our project settings, and we're going to go down to mono debugger agent. So debugger agent, and we're going to want to make sure our port is 23685, which it is by default, but just in case. And you'll want to check wait for debugger. Now, this is an important button. If you have this button checked and you just click play, your project will not run. You need to click it from Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code for it to work. And if you have this unchecked, then you cannot walk through code with Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. So that's something to keep in mind, that this is really important. So go ahead and hit close. And now that we have our scene created and we have everything set up, let's go ahead and attach a script real quick. So let's right click, attach script, change this to C# and just call this hello world. Actually, no, we'll call this player. Might as well, because if we're going to be making a player controller, you know? So player controller. So what that's going to do is it's going to generate our solution, and you'll see that it opened it up in Visual Studio Code, which is a perfect through line to us doing Visual Studio Code and setting all that up. So now mine's already set up, but I'll walk through the process again for you. So if you click on this little 4 little boxes here, and then you search the extension marketplace, you go C#, and you download the C# add-on by Microsoft, and then you type C# Godot, and there should be a C# tools for Godot. So you want to make sure you install that as well. And what that will do is it will 100% debug, allow you to debug and do all the configurations. You can see it actually does it all for you, which is fantastic. So once you have both of these installed, C# and C# tools for Godot, that will primarily do it for you in terms of setting up your Visual Studio Code. So if you click on your little file icon and click on player controller, if we do GD for Godot print hello world, and I will capitalize my H so I don't get yelled at, and I save that, how would we go about debugging this? Well, if you click on this little run and debug, and you say, hey, I need to create a launch.json file. So you click on that, and what that'll do is it'll pop up this little pop-up here. You can see it already has this nice little thing set up here for C# Godot. So if you click on that, bam, it's already created it. So now all you have to do is you just click play in editor, and you'll notice that Godot will fire off in a second once it does all of its compiling and things like that. And now it's going to go ahead and build our solution. It's going to run, and you'll notice it says hello world. Now, if it doesn't automatically pop up with this, make sure that you set your default scene. And if you do set your default scene, you will need to rerun your project. So you'll need to just go here and click play in editor, and it'll just handle it from there. So now if we stop this, there we are. If we go back to our Explorer and we do our C# player controller, we click play, or we click on the little breakpoint here, and we click back here and play in editor, you'll notice that it will break right here. There we go. So that's how simple it is really to set up C# inside of Godot. It's that simple. So now if we hit play, you'll see it's playing. Simple enough. I mean, they've come a long way with adjusting and setting up our CS proj and all of that. It does all of that for us, which is fantastic. So if you only wanted to see how to set it up inside of Visual Studio, that's all you need to do. It's that simple. So now that we've gotten it to debug and do all of that, now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set this up for Visual Studio to work with it. Now it's slightly different, and there's a lot more complexity that gets added into this, and it's something that we're definitely going to have to be careful about, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do is first we're going to close Visual Studio. So now that we close Visual Studio, we're going to come up here to Editor Settings, and we're going to go to Mono Editor and change this from Visual Studio Code to Visual Studio. And that's going to allow us to use Visual Studio instead of Visual Studio Code. So go ahead and hit close, right click on here, click on Show in File Manager. What that's going to do is it's going to open up a file manager with your guys' project. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to double click on our little solution here. All right, that's going to go ahead and fire up Visual Studio. So at first glance, what you're going to notice is you're going to notice all of your stuff's here. So that's exciting. Even all of the C# stuff that you would normally expect. So like GD dot, you can see it does come up with all of the stuff that you would expect. So, you know, like print, or if you were to type in like, you know, like vector 3, you know, vector 3 is equal to a new vector 3, right? Like all that stuff that you would expect is actually here, which is great. But if you hit play, you'll notice that Visual Studio yells at you and says, hey, you can't do that, right? The reason why is because you need a very specific extension to allow you to debug this. So let me go ahead and show you which extension it is. All right, it's called the Godot C# for Visual Studio extension. Now, the instructions on setting this up is a little on the sparse side, so I'm going to take you through it. It's pretty simple, but it could be a little on the complicated side. So if you come up here and you click on Releases and you pick the Godot add-in VSVSIX file here, it's going to let you save that, and then you'll be able to go ahead and open it. Now, you need to close your Visual Studio, and you can see I've already installed it, but go ahead and close your Visual Studio and run this little add-on. And go ahead and run this little add-on. And you'll see that for me, it's already installed, but just go ahead and install it. Once you have it installed, go ahead and reopen up your Visual Studio. Now, the easiest way to know if it's actually installed is by coming up to here to your extensions and click Manage Extensions. And you'll see if you go to Installed, Godot support for the Godot Engine C# projects, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So now if we close this and we try hitting play, well, that still didn't work, right? The reason why is the extension and the support for Visual Studio has kind of fluctuated a little bit since this plugin was created. So you're going to need to do a little bit of cheesing to get this to work. Or I'll throw a link in the description below that'll kind of go through a workaround that helps you make this work. Now, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do the workaround, but you're going to need to copy and paste a project file, and I will supply a link to where you can actually copy and paste that project file. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to right click up here, click Add New Project, and then what we're going to do is we're going to type class, because we need to create a class library. Now, we don't want this specific class library because this is for .NET Standard or .NET Core. That's specific for like future versions of Godot. We don't want this F# one because that's F#. It's not C#. This is Visual Basic. We don't want that one. And if we keep scrolling all the way down here, we'll have a class library .NET framework, a project for creating a C# class library .dll. We'll go ahead and double click on that. We'll name it stub. And I'm just going to throw it into my documents folder because it doesn't matter where it's located. So let's go ahead and hit create. All right. Now that we have this, what we're going to do is we're going to right click and set it as our startup project, which is right there. So let me re-show you where that's at. Right here. Set as startup project. So we'll click on that. And you'll notice that we have a little start button here. If we click on that, you'll see, hey, this doesn't work. What are you doing, right? So what we need to do is, if we open up our stub CS, providing that it allows us to, which it might not. Yeah, we're probably going to have to open it up. So if we right click on it and we open in File Explorer and we right click on this and we open, well, it's not going to let us open it with Visual Studio Code, so I'll just bring up Visual Studio Code. And what we'll do is we'll drag this into Visual Studio Code, or you can open it up with Notepad or something like that if you'd like, but I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. All right, now you'll see that it's got all these different references and things like that. Well, first what we need to do is we need to copy and paste some project information, which I'll throw in a comment below or in the description of the video for you guys, but we just copy and paste that information into here. We go ahead and hit save, and then we open up Visual Studio. You'll see that's going to say, hey, this was modified, so yep, go ahead and reload it. That's fine. And you'll notice that something changed. Play in editor. So if you go ahead and hit that, what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and call out to Godot and execute it. Perfect, right? We're there. If we open up our player controller and we hit Breakpoint here and we do play in editor, well, you'll see that it says application is in break mode, right? Well, did we break at our thing? We don't know, right? So if we hit continue execution, well, Godot started, but it didn't break at our breakpoint. And the reason why is because the assembly is getting loaded in. The assembly is getting loaded outside of the build environment. So think of it kind of like this. We're building the C# example, and I call it a C example because if it's C# example, it'll actually break your project. But it's building this and it's building this separately. But we need these two to build together, right? So we need to create a reference from this to this, right? So what we can do is we can click the down arrow. All right, well, I guess we don't have to click the down arrow, but we can click add reference and go ahead and add our C# project and go ahead and hit OK. And then if we go to our player controller and we hit play in editor, now that we have that assembly loaded, okay, well, some things got a little touch and go there for a minute, but I got it working. So it looks like the problem was, if you see how I have Godot C# example, in my previous section, these did not match my actual project name. So if you actually come up here and you go to project settings and you look at your application name, those all need to match. If they don't match, your project will not compile. I found that out by, bring this over here for you, by reading this little blurb here where they were talking about changing the project name actually breaks all the C# scripts. And I found that if you change your project settings name and then you run the project, it'll actually completely bork everything. So that's something to keep note. If you do run into this issue, what you can do, or at least what I ended up doing, was I ended up, so you can see here's the originals where I changed these names because of reasons, but what I did was I remade my references to the actual CS proj, and I deleted my mono, VS, and import. So I got rid of these three, and then I reloaded my project and hit play, and then that just rebuilt everything and rebuilt all of my stuff. So that's just something to keep in mind when you are running into something like that. That's a good way of handling it, if that makes sense. All right, so where in the world did we leave off? It was about 4 hours ago. So, oh yes. If we put a breakpoint right here and we go ahead and hit play in editor after we've hooked this reference up to here, if we hit play in editor, you'll see that it will now breakpoint right there. So now I can go ahead and step through my code as if it's Visual Studio Code. So that's what I have for you guys today. We went over how to set up C# inside of Godot. We went over how to set up Visual Studio Code to work with Godot and how to set up Visual Studio to work with Godot. I showed you guys how to walk through your code with both applications, and I showed you guys how to do some basic debugging with Mono, because Mono support is still very much beta alpha-y, so I know it's getting officially supported, at least I'm told, in 4.0. But that's what I have for you guys today, and if you like this video, hit that like button. If you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button, because I'm here to make content for you guys. And this video was a viewer request, and that's how I do 90% of my video ideas. So if you guys have ideas, throw them in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to take a look at them and add them to my schedule. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to see y'all next time. Thanks.